Professor Rori, welcome to our program. We are at the Faculty of Law, which is also a building where it's Faculty of Economics, of Sociology, a lot of history in this building. Can you tell us what is the significance of this building for Greek modern history and democracy?
Yes, so this is the Law School of Athens, and today it's a building which is also shared by Faculty of Politics, Economics, Sociology, Mass Media, and Business Administration, I think, and Turkish Studies. So it has a certain let's say, symbolic value in the sense that during the 7-year dictatorship, there was an occupation in 1973 in this building. So it draws back from this legacy of youth protest against the junta. And you can see this flare, I'm sure that you observed it while we were walking to come here. There are slogans almost everywhere. Well, this is not only a trademark of this university, this building, but it tells us something for the way that youth is politicized in Greece since the transition to democracy, at least in the university environment.
How is it different from other European countries? Because we know what you said from history. The revolt started in the student movement. It's always students on the street, not just concerning the subjects that are, you know, subject for the youth. What is the history, not just history, and present day sense of this politicization of the youth from your perspective?
So I think Greece is not really an exception to other youths in Europe, particularly not when we compare it to youths in Southern Europe, where they had similar recent historic pasts. But it is maybe different in the sense that let's say political parties have put their feet into the universities. So since the 1974 transition to democracy, and especially in the 80s, the political youths have had great powers over choosing, for instance, the academic authorities, the rectors, and they have had significant power in decisions that are made by the collective organs in the university. This is something that has changed recently in terms of official powers, so they are diminishing, but on the other hand, the youth in the university remains quite politicized. This does not concern the majority, I think, of students, even if it is the case in my faculty, for instance, because we are a faculty of politics. But there are very politicized minorities, which, let's say, they give the tempo. So this is why you still see all those graffitis in the walls, and you see different sort of vignettes, etc. in the building.
In the last decade, Greece was basically the center point of crisis in Europe, from the economic crisis to refugee crisis. Okay, now we're expecting, they say, long winter and other changes. Did it change, and how did it change the Greek society, this decade behind us?
It has been a very traumatizing experience, which did not only mark the society in economic terms, but also in political terms. I'm sure you know that the political system has changed significantly since the first elections that took place during the crisis in 2012. So the old two-party system that, let's say, alternated the power between New Democracy and PASOK, it has collapsed. Mainly PASOK has collapsed electorally. In the beginning, New Democracy as well, so the Conservative Party, but New Democracy managed somehow to reposition itself in front of the electorate. This was not the case for the socialists, who did not manage to present another narrative during the crisis, and they were mainly blamed for the bailouts. So they were the ones who have been extremely punished by the electorate. And then this meant that there was somehow more room for new parties to come in. So Syriza, which was a party already existing in the party system since the 2000s, it had a meteoric rise during the crisis, and it managed to win power in 2015. It was the first party of the radical left in Europe to form a government, and this of course was not done with a single party majority. They have governed with a party of the radical right, which is Independent Greeks. It was a splinter party from New Democracy. So it was also another novelty of the European party systems, because the party of the radical right and the party of the radical left, they formed a government together. Of course, after this Greek experience, we have seen this in other countries as well. But Greece, it is quite specific in the sense that it's the first country which has tested all those novelties during the crisis.
Talking about that, your field of research, if I'm right, one of them is the radicalization of youth in Greece. You've mentioned the history. What is the present, and how is this present basically transcends to the polling, to the voting boxes in Greece? How big is the youth participation in elections?
So the Greek youth is quite politicized. We have seen during the financial crisis that young people have voted for the radical parties of the left and the right. So we have seen young people voting for Golden Dawn, for instance. And this was quite shocking. But also we have seen young people voting for Syriza and for other leftist parties. This, of course, is not an exception. I don't think that Greece is an outlier in that. We generally see radical patterns of behavior among young people. We see, though, that after let's say, the end of the financial crisis, a lot of those tensions have diminished. So we see, for instance, that violent protest has dropped a lot, which during the crisis, it was like everywhere. So we had violent movements, protest movements. This meant that the youth was in the streets in a quite a regular basis. This is not the case anymore. We still see that young people vote, for instance, majoritarily for Syriza. Syriza is the party that has won in the last elections the youth vote. And the conservatives are quite aware that they are not very popular among young people. But I don't think this is a static situation, and from the surveys that we have seen during the last couple of years, what is apparent is that the more the situation in the economy, gets back to normal, and unemployment is diminishing, especially among the youth, because Greece has had the highest youth unemployment during the crisis. So the more we get back to normal and the trends in the economy are getting better, the more we see this radicalization, being toned down at least. I think those are the main patterns, and then we see also that, when, for instance, young voters of the radical left, for instance, when they're disappointed from some policies, they tend to, let's say, to take a step back, not participate, for instance. It's not that they are apathetic, but they are disappointed, disenchanted. This means that they will not, for instance, go to vote. But
they want to participate. That's interesting.
Yes.
Voting goes down, they want to be engaged.
In general, we have quite a high participation in the youth. I don't think that we are among the highest
in Europe.
Scores in Europe.
Do you think that this lowering of the voting age helped in that regard? Do you think it needs to be?
Yes, I think it helps a lot for political participation in general. So I don't think it's only about the vote. Young people, they wanted to discuss politics. They use a lot the new technologies, the internet. I think, you know, they prefer to be able to express their views online because this is easier. They are the generation of TikTok, the generation of emoticons. So I think they have been very used to this form of political participation, which is easier, more anonymous. And during the pandemic, I think this is something that was even more enhanced. So people had to stay at home and they were discussing a lot in social media. And because of those measures of social distancing, I think this made young people to discuss a lot online during those 2 years that we had those measures.
Spending a lot of time with young people as a professor, I need to ask you, what do you personally think of the concept of our representative democracy? Because, you know, my generation, it was voting every 4 years, or depending on the situation, you go and put the paper in the ballot box. Do we need maybe some kind of change of a system for this generation that you described, that is digital, TikTok, but they want to participate? They're, I think, very focus-oriented in certain subjects. So what is your idea of our democracy in Europe in general?
Yeah, so I don't think that even for the Greek youth that we tend to believe it's highly politicized, I don't think that this generation of young people, they want to participate in everything. Yes. So I don't think that they would, let's say, appreciate if we injected a lot more ways of participation, because they are more, let's say, oriented towards identity politics. So they have specific agendas. They're interested, for instance, for policies related to LGBT rights, climate change. They're interested, for instance, in anti-authoritarian policies, let's say, whether to have police inside the university campus or not. The Me Too movement has also attracted them. So I don't think that if we ask them to do a lot more, this would necessarily mean that they would participate a lot more, because they want to participate a la carte in specific things. This doesn't mean that if, for instance, you bring somehow more doses of deliberation and participation via, let's say, referendums, which can have somehow consulting character, not
obligatory.
Yes, not obligatory, especially because, you know, in Greece we have had this bitter experience of the memorandum, the referendum in 2015, where there was a heavy polarization among the electorate, and the youth has participated a lot in that referendum, voting against the bailouts. So the political elite and the government in that time, they have asked them to participate via direct democracy. But the day after, the Prime Minister has changed the decision of the referendum, and instead of no, he turned the no to a yes. So people voted against the bailouts, and then they had a new agreement. So this doesn't mean that, you know, they now know that voting more via referendums, it doesn't really mean that everything is possible. So the experience, I think it has been somehow traumatizing, because then, after they were disappointed from the referendum, what that meant is that they had no expectations for other, you know, alternatives. So Yes and no. I think representative democracy has many issues, but for me it remains the best system that we have. Insofar, there are no miracles in liberal democracies and in other political systems either. So I think we need to have injections, and we need to have more deliberation, more participation, and give opportunities. But this doesn't mean necessarily that this generation of young people, they will grab all those opportunities and, you know, pull their participation to the margins. So I think from what I see from my students, for instance, of course, this is not the general public of the youth. It's a very specific audience, political science students. But they're quite, let's say, critical about the way that democracy works, not though in a cynical manner, not though in an irrational manner. So they are critical Democrats, as we tend to say. That's what I think. Even if my students are a minority among the youth in Greece in our days.
So you said your students are minority. Who is the majority of these youth when you look?
I think the young people in Greece in our days, they try to make ends meet. So what is the difference with respect to my generation is that they work a lot, they study and they work at the same time, which is also something that has changed during the financial crisis. Young people are less protected by the family safety net. In our days, it is no longer present as it was in the past. This means that they have to have, at the same time, they have to make ends meet, but they have to study, they want to travel abroad, but it's not as easy as it used to be before the financial crisis. So I think they are more extrovert, but they are less, they have less means in their hands. So I don't think that they have a lot of time to participate in politics, and this means that we tend to hear them more when the crisis is around. And because Greece is a country with many crises, no, maybe this is not a good comment to make in the sense that in our days there are crises everywhere. But because during the financial crisis there had many opportunities of protest, we saw that we had this image that the youth in Greece is radicalized. This in our days, I think it is no longer the trend.
But to summarize, main problems still unemployment,
diminishing though.
Diminishing. Yes. We have still immigration, also brain drain.
So during the crisis, 500,000 of mainly young people left the country, but during the pandemic there was a return vague, let's say. So people started coming back because they saw that, you know, they were restricted everywhere. So why not come back to my country if I have to be in house? That was the way that people were thinking back in the beginning of the pandemic. And now we see that all the more young people in the surveys, they say that, you know, we want to go travel abroad, but we want to come back as well. The main problem, in my view, is, of course, unemployment, which, as I said, it is diminishing. On the other hand, the wages are very low in Greece, and this is something that hasn't changed after the crisis. It's a very serious problem, and we lack good quality jobs for young people. So people feel that even if they have a job, it will be something very precarious, just, you know, to make ends meet. So they don't see that they have good employment perspectives in this country, and this is real. It's not something subjective. The labor market has deteriorated a lot during the financial crisis, and this hasn't gone back to normal yet.
And what can help that? Education reform? We heard that, you know, this government has huge plans, but are you an optimist or?
I think they are very realistic. They understand that they have to change things for the youth, and they have given some incentives during the last couple of years, like vouchers, free passes, and housing policies. So it's not that they're not doing things. The problems are though big, and it needs time. Nothing, things don't change in politics from one day to the other. I think what will change the labor market for the youth is the strengthening of the economy. So the more there will be investments and the more companies will make profits, they will be able to hire people and create new jobs, better jobs. But I think there is also a matter of having the political will to canalize the way that, for instance, companies will treat the youth. So give incentives maybe to the companies to hire people, but also create better jobs, jobs that can keep the young people here and not make them feel scared or disappoint them. Because we see that they have a lot of energy, they want to have opportunities in life like the previous generations have had, but at this moment it's not the case.
And for the end, if you could pick and choose the voices of your students in the classroom, what will be their message for their future and, I don't know, for our common future?
So I'm quite happy with my students, and I feel that they are critical in a very positive manner. So they're not cynical, they're not protesting, but they were doing very good debates. And I am very optimistic for the fact that they have a different mentality from my generation, for instance, which was already quite an extrovert generation, but this generation, they read a lot more in English, they communicate in foreign languages, they have better experiences, and they're more open to the new. That's what I think. And when we have discussions in class, what I see is that they are not going to the easy arguments. So, the hatred, the rejection of, the easy rejection of the system. So they try to understand and they try to find nuances. And this is why I am quite optimistic, because it is very easy to be on the one side and on the other, but it's more difficult when you're young and politicized and radicalized. It's difficult to find the midway, and I see that they try to understand more than make easy comments. So I remain optimistic for my students.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.